everyone. Thanks for tuning in again for this episode of Smarter Sourcing. My name is John Pavia, and today we are speaking with Freya Hurwitz, the Director of Procurement at none other than TripAdvisor. And I say none other than TripAdvisor because we are going away in about a week, and we're going to Greece, and my wife is driving me absolutely crazy. And she is on your site every night looking at reviews and everything else. I know we were talking before, you have kids, you plan your vacations. Do you get inside information that the rest of us don't get?
I did get a little bit of inside information from our team at Cruise Critic. It's another one of our subsidiaries. When I was taking my daughter on a graduation cruise in January, we were between two ships, and I said, all right, which one of these two should we take? So I do know the people that ask about certain things, but for the most part, I get the same information everyone else does.
Oh man, it's amazing how much information's out there now when you want to take a trip, especially when you want to take a trip or go to a restaurant or whatever. But when you're going to another country, it actually is so helpful compared to, I think about traveling to Europe my first time, many years ago. And, back then it was folders, right? So anyway, it's we use TripAdvisor quite a bit. So listen, it's such an interesting place, and it's in such an interesting space, travel and hospitality. So, but tell us how you got here into your current role, and were you thinking to yourself, I'd love to be director of procurement at a place like TripAdvisor?
So I think when I was at Northwestern, I didn't know what procurement was. Well, no one I've met in procurement has ever said that was my dream from day one, was to be in procurement. Like, that's just not, although I did meet one person who is young and said that to me, and I was like, okay. It was a very roundabout way to get here. I started in marketing, market research, e-commerce, and then I went into product management. I started in product management at TripAdvisor, went over to sales operations, IT enablement, and then finally over to procurement about 6 years ago. So did a little bit of everything, ended up in procurement mostly because I had been working with our head of procurement at the time, who is now more senior, and just working with him on some of the contracts that were related to the stuff I was doing day to day. And it seemed like it was going to be a good fit to move over there. I was a little done with what I'd been doing. And so it did turn out to be a good fit. It's actually the thing I've done the longest in my life now.
Yeah, you've been there almost 16 years, right?
Been a TripAdvisor for about 15 and a half years, but procurement for the last 6.5, and 6.5 years is the longest I think I've ever done one thing anywhere.
So what would you say to somebody who, they're in, and I get this a lot from my kids friends, going to college, not sure what they want to do. They ask you what you do. They give you a look like, what is that? And then, because I know what I've said with the various things that I've done that don't sound all that sexy to a 18-year-old about to start college.
Yeah.
It is actually, I think, a fascinating area, which is part of the reason we put this podcast together. What do you say to people when they ask you, so what are you doing? What is that? Is that even something that I should consider as a career?
So my daughter's actually about to start college. We're taking her next week, and we've had some conversations, and she listens on some of my calls. She's like, oh, that sounds actually really cool. And, I think when people hear what procurement is, it doesn't sound sexy or cool if you just say like, oh, I negotiate contracts. And I do more sort of on the, I'll say, procurement versus purchasing side. My husband's in more of a manufacturing kind of industry, and for him it's purchasing, where they're just signing purchase orders. And honestly, I can't think that that's all that exciting. But when she hears what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, and she hears some of the calls I'm having with the legal team, and understanding commercial terms and legal terms, and working with all different people all over the world, then all of a sudden it's sort of cool. But really what I tell most of the people who ask, how I got into it, or, what should they be thinking about, is really like, just figure out what you like and what's interesting to you, and start there, and figure out what kind of job does that. And then when you're in that job, maybe something else will be interesting to you, or you'll learn something and say, oh, I wonder if I can use this to this next thing. And you go to the next thing. And that's sort of how I have moved around quite a bit, is just by looking around sort of all the time and saying, either what's the new thing. I mean, when I started working, e-commerce wasn't really even a thing. And now obviously it's sort of the thing, but I was curious enough about it to figure it out and learn it, and got into it that way. And I think with AI, that's going to happen again. And if you're not willing to sort of be curious and adapt, and be a little bit flexible about what you want, it's going to be much harder to be successful.
I think especially with a company like TripAdvisor, I mean, you guys have been part of a revolution in the way that people think about travel, hospitality, dining. And just like with a lot of companies, to be in a place like procurement at a place like TripAdvisor, it's all about the quality of the information you're ingesting and then the
Yep.
quality of that information that you're delivering to people who are using your site. I mean, the service that you provide. And so, it's so what you do and in procurement, accessing the data, making, and then being part of the group that's buying services to then deliver the data. I know it's IT driven, but you play an integral role in the success of your company, as do a lot of sourcing and procurement departments in any company. And yet you're at the sort of the core of what the company does. And I think that would make it exciting.
It is exciting. And what I've come to realize is my team is the only one that really deals with every group in the whole company. We're split into about 4 sort of main brands and subsidiaries that all run fairly independently of each other. But my team covers all of them globally. And we're the only team that does that. Even the finance team, each FP&A person is responsible for a specific team or group, and they don't really cross. So they don't necessarily know what one of the other teams is doing. But I see every contract. And so I know what every team is doing, and I know how to bring people together to say, like, hey, marketing teams, you guys should talk to each other because you're all looking for the same kind of tool, but you're looking at different vendors. So maybe we can do this as a bigger group and have better outcomes.
Tell me about getting stakeholder buy-in, because the way you just described it, I mean, you're touching every department globally, and you'd be the first procurement person I've ever met if you didn't have a story or some kind of experience where you've got a stakeholder within the company and they've been doing their own procurement, and now you come along and they're like, well, this is the way the company wants to do it going forward, and trying to really get that buy-in.
So we definitely have a few groups that are reluctant to let us help them. But very honestly, my team is so small and we run so lean that if they're really that reluctant, as long as they're going through legal and getting sort of the compliance checks and they don't care so much about maybe saving a little bit more money or negotiating better terms, I've got enough to do that I can let them do it. And what I focus on is just regularly talking to them about, all right, well, if you're going to negotiate for yourself, here are the things you should make sure we have, and here's the things we should look at. And I've put together a portal on, sort of an internal portal that says, like, here's some negotiation strategies. Here's the things you need to look at in a contract if you're going to do it by yourself. Because procurement isn't, well, it's sort of a mandate now, but it's still not an enforced mandate at TripAdvisor to use us. So
Tell us a little bit about how you're organized, just generally in terms of your procurement organization at TripAdvisor.
So right now we're a mighty 1.5 strong, including myself. We
Wow.
had one other person, and we're looking to hire someone to replace them. So we'll be a mighty 2.5 person strong team, and we handle pretty much everything except for benefits, utilities, media purchases, real estate. It's pretty much it. We handle everything besides those categories.
So just to clarify how TripAdvisor works, do you guys buy data that you then deliver, or is it just you're shaking your head no? So the answer is
No.
that.
So all of our data is user generated. When you asked earlier if I get inside scoops, there sort of are no inside scoops. We don't have people who go out and look at properties or sort of do internal reviews of things. It's all user generated. Again, on the cruise side, it's a little bit different. We do have an editorial staff on the cruise side that does review cruises, but otherwise everything is user generated. Photos, videos, reviews. We do translate it, so we have like a translation service. So if someone reviews it in English and someone from France wants to look at that review, it can be translated into French for you. But otherwise, we don't do anything. We don't edit them. We don't touch them.
Got
We
it.
have a whole fraud team that does monitor and moderate the reviews to make sure there's nothing inappropriate. But
That was my next question. Your quality control on the things that the users are actually posting. So you have a whole team.
yeah, so we have a whole team that handles fraud and trust and safety and moderation and content. and they have algorithms and tools that they use to run everything through to make sure that there's no fraud in reviews, so that people aren't reviewing their own properties or people aren't reviewing competitive properties, that people aren't getting paid to review properties. We've had problems with that. And, there's, you can look up, there's news stories all over the place about how we've taken down sort of, I don't want to call them cartels, but groups of people who are essentially paying for reviews. So we have a huge team that does do that kind of work.
So as you ran through your background, you've had a varied background. Has that allowed you to, I'm going to say, connect the dots maybe a little easier than a person in procurement who has not been in many areas of a company and gotten sort of a broad spectrum of experience?
Absolutely. I think the people I know who sort of came up through finance and just finance into procurement, I think they have a harder time understanding what it is that we're buying a lot of times. So when it comes to software or developer tools or marketing services, for example, I mean, I've worked in marketing, so I have actually bought affiliate marketing services. I've bought email marketing. I know how that they're charged. When I was in IT enablement, I not only bought the software, but I also worked on the rollout plans and implemented them. So I have a really good understanding of what it is that we're buying, what we need in terms of support from the vendors that we're buying from. And I think it makes my job a little bit easier because it helps me build trust with the stakeholders as well, because they know that I understand what it is that we're buying, and I can sort of skip a couple steps when I meet with both them and the vendors to say, I get what this product is, and I know, and it helps me because the commercial models make a little bit more sense when you understand what the products are.
And your finance background, I really like that because I'm a big advocate of with anybody, any young person I talk to about, I don't care what you're doing, understanding how to read a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, P&L, and understanding how your company, your organization, if it's a nonprofit, how it makes money, how it spends money, what the budget is, and how what you do can impact that is so important. How did your finance background come in handy for you, or has it not?
It definitely has. I mean, actually worked in accounting all through high school and college. So I have a little bit of an accounting background. I'm not a CPA or anything, but have an accounting background. I've done, a variety of classes in finance. I managed my own P&L at the previous company where I had to, I had sales quotas I had to make. I had expense numbers that I was tied to in terms of I couldn't spend more than X on certain things. So I think understanding that also helps me work with our FP&A team when I'm looking for budget approval and we're looking to see, can we rob Peter to pay Paul for something, or, and I can go to them and I can say, this is actually a swap. This isn't a new investment. So it's a new vendor, but we're going to, discontinue this thing and start this thing. So, it's not neutral for finance. And like, oh, okay, well, if it's not neutral, then fine. We have a lot of things that are based on cost of goods. So, we can pass through the charges to some of our advertisers for certain things. So those are also, when I understand that, oh, this is the cost of sale or cost of goods, it's not a ding on the budget. So understanding those terms and understanding why it would make sense to do that really helps move forward as well.
So let me ask you this: in the business that you're in, what keeps you up at night? What are those things that you're saying to yourself, "Well, this aspect of the business is on me. It's on our group." What are those things that you think about when you go to bed, and the first thing you think about when you wake up?
I think the thing that keeps me up the most, honestly, is the speed to getting things done. And part of that's just our culture. Historically, we had this motto called speed wins, and every team was just like to get things done as quickly as they possibly could and not follow any sort of procedures and just charge ahead and get things done. And that's been changing over time, and which is good because now we actually have processes in place and we have compliance we have to follow, and legal has to review the contracts and all the things that make sense for a big public company. But I do sometimes feel the pressure to speed things up even when it's hard, because I know it's holding back our product team or our engineering team from either launching something new or improving something that will then generate revenue.
So let's talk about TripAdvisor in a more holistic way, because there's other apps and websites and concepts that are actually owned by TripAdvisor, and some people may not know that. So why don't you run through a couple of those and educate some of our listeners and viewers?
So TripAdvisor Group basically has, I'll say, four main brands. There's Brand TripAdvisor, which is the website everybody sort of knows and hopefully loves, but the one where you see the stickers in all the windows everywhere and everyone says review us on TripAdvisor. Brand TripAdvisor. We have Viator, which is our experiences brand. They sell tours and experiences, sort of skip the line tickets for big places. So skip the line at the Louvre, skip the line at the MoMA, whatever it is. They sell all sorts of experiences like that. They sell day trips and airport transfers, you name it. You can probably get it on Viator. And then we have The Fork, which is our European restaurant brand. I'll call it sort of equivalent to Open Table here in the US, but all over Europe. And we also have some in Australia and South America. And so that's a very different business model in reality because it's much more focused on the restaurants and a little bit less so on the diners, although we are focused on the diners as well.
And you have the Fork as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. I use that over in Europe.
Yeah. So we have The Fork and then we have Cruise Critic, which again is the one where we have some editorial, but basically it helps you book and choose the right cruise for whatever you want to do. So we have the lists of all the cruises that you can take and pros and cons of all the boats. And there are user reviews as well, but there's also some editorial reviews of that.
So with all those different brands and concepts, I was reading how you've launched in collaboration with your colleagues, obviously, a bunch of collaboration tools to 3,500 different users.
Yeah, so that's sort of our full employee base is about that.
And I read it was with 98% adoption. I'm like, man, I don't think I've ever been part of anything where we launched it and got 98% adoption, especially when you're talking about 3,500 people.
In a month.
In a month. That's pretty cool. So what's the secret to your success of doing that?
I mean, I think there were a few things. One, it was a good tool. Two, it was a lot of preparation. I understood, this is when I was on the IT enablement team, but I went out and I talked to all the teams who were going to be resistant to start using it. And I talked to them for months in advance of launching it and worked out launch plans for them, worked out training plans for them. I met with them and the whole teams regularly and said, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to work. This is why it's so easy. And just sort of hammered it in and worked with the vendor also. And they helped, they had lunch and learns for us where they came and offered training for us to use the tool. And it was really sort of a group effort, but it was just a lot of preparation and a lot of understanding what each group in the business was afraid of, what they needed, what they were looking for, what problems it could solve for them. And once we sort of went through that with all of them and explained the problems it could solve for them, explained why it wasn't scary, then it was pretty easy.
So I read where you were saying that you think one of the most important things is to stay curious. And you actually used that just before in one of your comments. So, I mean, that's not a hard sentence to understand what that means, but that's at a surface level. What does it mean at a deeper, more personal level when you recommend that the most important thing is to stay curious?
So I think, there's what I said before in terms of staying curious about what else is out there. So, what's the new technology? What's the new way to do things? Can this process be made better? I like to say that I actually take a product manager approach to procurement where I'm always iterating on our processes and our systems, because when I was in product management, that's what we would do. We would try something out, we would test it. If it didn't work, we would change it. If we thought we could make it better, we would make it better, even if it was incremental steps. And so I think that's part of the curiosity is, this isn't working as well as I want it to. How can I make it better? And keep hammering on that over and over again. How can I make it better? I think on a sort of non-work basis, I think just being curious about the world and about people and what's going on, it's a different mindset than some people have. And it allows me to build relationships with people. It allows me to try to understand where they're coming from, to focus on getting to sort of a win-win. And I don't see procurement as a zero-sum game. I think there's definitely room for everybody to feel good about the outcomes of negotiations. And I think being curious really helps with that.
This goes, I think, hand in glove with that comment, because I've also read where you said, look for challenges beyond your comfort zone. And that's consistent with what you just talked about. So let me ask you a question. What's the most uncomfortable procurement situation you've had to face? And what did you learn from it?
Also comfortable procurement situation. Well, this is pretty uncomfortable for me. Um, I definitely am forcing myself to become more comfortable speaking in public, talking about things like this. This is not something that's natural for me, but I've been working on it for a while now and it's getting better. But I think in terms of the hard business situations, it's when things just don't go well and I can figure out what I should have done differently. It's not that hard when I'm buying a tool for somebody and a year later, it just priorities have changed. So we're not going to use it anymore. Like I couldn't have predicted the priorities were going to change. But when I haven't thought through everything or when I haven't asked the right questions, and, it's certainly a learning experience for me. So I can go to the next one and do better. But, there's definitely been agreements and negotiations that have lingered too long because I didn't do everything in my power to make it go faster.
Let me ask you this one, because this is, I think it's a common one for people in the sourcing and procurement world. And that is, all of a sudden you're being asked or expected to renew a contract with a vendor or a supplier that's been with the company forever, got relationships up and down the ladder at the C-suite level. And there's a better alternative out there. And that has, in my experience, in talking to a bunch of folks from sourcing, procurement, supply chain, that has been a very common, uncomfortable situation for a lot of people I've spoken with.
So I think for us, we don't have that as often. I think our teams are generally really willing to look at other things that are out there and keep adapting. I think that's it's actually something unique in most of the employees at TripAdvisor. I think is this like sense of curiosity and continuous improvement. So it's not too hard to convince people to try something new, even if it's deeply ingrained. There are certain teams where that's not true, but for the most part, that's true. I think the hardest thing is actually when we want to get economies of scale and we want the 3 or 4 business units to all work together to sign up to a contract, but they all want to do their own thing and they're all looking for autonomy and don't understand that, the actions or inactions of one group, change the cost structure for a different group for the same tool or for something else. And so that's one of the hard things is figuring out where we can create the connections and where maybe, one team's just going to have to pay a little bit more because another team doesn't want to go along or the thing won't isn't the right thing for them.
So let's talk about technology a little bit and things that you're excited about as it relates to the business of TripAdvisor. Obviously AI is changing everything, but if you could, is there anything specific that you can point to and say, this is really, people have no idea. I love talking to people in the sciences and doing this podcast. I've spoken to some people who have given me some insight as to things that are coming around the corner that, you know, it's not confidential information, but most people aren't talking about it. In your world, what do you see coming around the corner that you think is really exciting?
I think one of the big things that we're working on still, we launched, but it keeps getting better, is our trip planning tool. And this is something that I wanted to do 12 years ago when I was in product management and be able to allow people to say, I'm looking for a trip that, to take my 2 little kids on to this part of the world where we do these 4 things. Tell me what we can do. And we are now using AI to actually be able to pull from all of our data and really create that trip for somebody where you can ask in plain language. You don't have to figure out how to do it. When I started at TripAdvisor, it was actually really hard to get. You'd have to pick your location first. So I'd have to say, I'm looking to do something in Boston. And then it would tell you all the things in Boston, but it wouldn't tell you anything in Cambridge, which is 2 seconds from Boston. And so, we've evolved over time and now there's, the idea of sort of nearby in this maps, you can say like, I'm looking for something to do in this general area and not, this particular town specifically. And now we're working on, I want to take a road trip from Boston to Florida. Give me things to do along the way. And I think none of that would be possible without AI and without the ability to crunch our data just that much faster and pull information on the fly.
And is that happening already? People can go on and do that right now.
I don't know if the road trip bit is happening yet. That was one of my product suggestions. I haven't tried that lately. When I did try it a couple of years ago, when we first launched our trip planning, it was not available. But in general, yes, the trip planning is available where you can go in and say, I want to take a trip here or to this area and with these people and do these kinds of things, and it will give you a whole itinerary with
That's
things to
amazing.
do at restaurants and hotels. So it's essentially truly working as a travel agent now and not necessarily just, a place where you actually have to know already what places you want to look at.
Yeah, I love that because when we travel, we like to do day trips out of the major city and then do things along the way. If we have a destination spot and go into restaurants that the tourists aren't at, that the locals are going to, I think that stuff is really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to see how the sites evolve to be able to recommend things in a much more personalized and granular way than it ever was able to before.
So I thought you were going to tell me that, and I know you can do virtual stuff already and put the goggles on and feel like you're in a certain place, but do we get to a point with TripAdvisor that at some point, you can go on TripAdvisor and get that experience? And
I don't think that is under development. I don't know anything about that. I don't like that actually. So it's not something I'd be looking for. I think sitting in your house and sticking goggles on and pretending to sort of experience a place is not the same as experiencing a place. And I love to travel. I mean, it's part of why I'm at TripAdvisor. And I think being in different places, it's just different than sticking goggles on.
yeah, no, I wasn't thinking about doing it in lieu of going.
Oh,
I was thinking about, you're able to, like we're going to Greece and we're not sure if we want to go to this island or that island. So you can go into a place like TripAdvisor and actually get
got
a
it.
really good sense of what it's like, what each place is like.
I think there are some 3D kind of videos and stuff that are available. And even that I have mixed feelings about. I have mixed feelings about the sort of loss of surprise, I think, if I can put it that way, where, you don't know what you're getting necessarily. You don't know everything that's coming and you can be sort of either pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised, but it's at least a little bit of a surprise with what you're going to find. And I think if you look too hard and plan too much and, look at every detail beforehand, it removes your incentive to then sort of be more curious when you get somewhere because you've already sort of detailed out exactly the things you want to do. And there's less serendipitous just finding of things.
So you've spent a lot of time in your career, and especially even right, and obviously right now at TripAdvisor in procuring technology. And I was curious to know if someone were to come into you and say, so, procuring technology is like procuring, any other widget. What would your response be to that in terms of your approach to the nuances of being in technology procurement?
So I think one of the big differences is it's very much not a commodity. There are, it's I'll say a little bit more like buying a car, but if I were to continue the car analogy, if I'm looking at a Honda Pilot and a Toyota Highlander, they're similar cars. They do obviously like in the basic sense of things, like they take you from place A to place B. So they're both cars, just like project management tools both will do some sort of project management. But if I'm looking for, a specific feature because that's what's going to help my business, one may have it and one might not. And so there's so many little nuanced features in all of the competitive products that it's not like buying a widget. It's not figuring out, how do I get the cheapest ream of paper where, I don't really care if it's, I don't know, Staples or WB Mason or Amazon or whoever to provide my printer paper. I'm sure there is some technical difference potentially between some of them, but it's not anything that's going to be noticeable. Where with software, a lot of the software that we're buying, there aren't direct competitors for it. So A, the leverage is different in terms of how we can negotiate, and B, the evaluation criteria is different because it's not, what's the volume pricing and, what's the cost. It's, does this do these four things? Can it integrate into our tech stack? effectively? How hard is it to integrate? How hard would it be to switch away from it if we do use it? There's so many more questions that we have to answer when we're looking at buying software, that it's much more complex than buying widgets. I will say buying software is leaps and bounds easier than buying AI tools right now, just because the commercial models are much more settled and stable in terms of most of them are license based, or there's a very sort of fixed way you can buy them, where AI tools I think are still trying to figure out what their commercial models are. So that's much harder. But that doesn't change the fact that even just evaluating the tools and figuring out what the right tool is to solve your specific problem, that is the first step for any of it.
Do you think we get to a point where AI can replace true category expertise in procurement?
I don't think it's going to replace category expertise. I personally think that it's going to change the dynamic between the vendor and the buyer, such that there'll be many fewer salespeople and many more sort of customer success people, because it's going to be, how do I, as a vendor, make sure you continue to get value from this product? Because there's going to be more commoditization, I think, of these software tools as AI makes things easier to build and deliver. And I also think AI is going to make the pricing and the feature sets more transparent to both sides. And so there's going to be, I think, less negotiation of price and more discussion of value creation and features and how it's used, and making sure it's really sort of being effective versus, like, what's the lowest price I can get per license.
So I'm going to finish with a couple of what we'll call lightning round questions, and would love to get your quick responses to some of these. In 2024, or just in the last year, 2024 to 2025, what was the biggest learning for you? Something that was an aha moment that you just like, that's interesting.
I think the biggest aha was that most people don't think about buying things. Most of our stakeholders aren't thinking about how they're buying things. They just want the tool to do their thing, whatever it is they're doing, and they don't really care about the rest of it. And I think understanding that has also helped me convince some of the people who didn't want to use procurement to use us, because, like, they don't care they just want it done. They want to sign the thing and be done, and so they can start using their tool.
And that happened in the last year, because you've been doing this a while.
I think it's just been more obvious in the last year. And maybe that's just because we've had so many more projects come through, and people are like, we just want to try this, we just want to try this, we just want to try this. And part of it's a culture shift at TripAdvisor in terms of, like, buying versus building, and just testing all these new tools that are coming out in the market. And I think that's part of it, is that we're doing POCs with all these work. And because there's so many of them, the business stakeholders they don't care about the process. They just want to get it done.
Hmm.
And so it's really, I think, changed the way I'm approaching working with them and working with the other teams that need to sign off.
What trend do you see coming that is, you believe, and I know there's AI is the easy one, but what trend in the practice of sourcing procurement do you see coming, emerging now, that's going to have the biggest impact in the next couple of years?
I think it's going to be the data transparency. There are a lot of companies out there right now that are building these huge databases of pricing, price points, and things like that across, they're essentially giving away workflow automation tools or things like that in order to get all of your data for your contracts, so they can get benchmarks and they can pull it all together. And I think there's so many firms doing it right now, and there's going to be a consolidation there, but that's also going to make things a lot more transparent across the industry. And I think it's going to change the way software is priced.
So then the follow up to that one is, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge or challenges for folks in sourcing and procurement in 26, 27, 28 in the near future?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've already seen this with some vendors, but like I said, I think the pricing models are going to change, and there's going to be, we're already starting to hear from some of our vendors, like, we don't negotiate price, full stop. Like, there's no negotiation. This is what it is. You take it or leave it. There's a multi-year discount of X, or there's, here are the tiers, and this is what it is, but you're not going to be able to get anything else. And I think as that moves into sort of more of the mainstream, it's going to change the role of procurement people, because right now some of our value is in savings and negotiation. And if that is not true anymore because you can't negotiate, then we have to find value in what we do elsewhere.
So then my last question then is, how will it impact the way you measure success in what you do?
I think we're going to have to move much further upstream earlier in the process so that we can really help the business think about how they're going to implement tools. I think we're going to become a little bit more on the operations side in terms of, this is, we understand you're looking at these three tools. This one's going to take 6 months to implement, or this one's going to be this much harder, or whatever. And it's going to be up to us to understand a lot more of the nuances to what people are buying, so we can help them understand what the right product is instead of just getting them the best price on the product they've already picked.
Well, Freya, that was great. I have like 10 more questions, but we're out of time. And so, but I want to really thank you for taking the time to do this. Like I told you at the very beginning, we use TripAdvisor quite a bit. So it was really cool getting a sort of the inside baseball with respect to what you do at TripAdvisor. So let's stay in contact. I know you're up near the Boston area, but
Yep.
Really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you.
Me too.
And for all of our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you on the next episode of Smarter Sourcing. Take care.